All right, so I'm going to go ahead and call this business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education to order.
You're ready.
No, that's okay. I thought there was an emergency. No, there's not. It is Tuesday, April 4th, 2023. We're meeting in a hybrid format. Some of us are here in Casco Bay. We have Board Member Youssef joining online, and Board Member Biliou is not able to join tonight. So, Superintendent Townsend, will you please call the roll?
All right. Member Biliou, Vice Chair Bonda,
Présent.
Member Bryden,
Here.
Member Figdor, Member Grant, here. Member Opperman,
Here.
Member Russell Better,
Here.
Member Youssef,
Here.
Member Ellis,
Here.
Member Amond,
Here.
Member McLaughlin,
Here.
Member Santiago,
Coming in.
and Chair Lentz.
Here, and Board Member Figdor will be here momentarily as well, presently, or within the room. So now we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
The Portland Public Schools recognizes the original inhabitants of the land on which our city and schools stand. The Wolastoqiyik, or Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes, known collectively as the Wabanaki Confederacy, or people of the Dawnland. We are honored to have Wabanaki children among our students today, and as a district, we are committed to making the past, present, and future of Wabanaki peoples visible in our schools and classrooms. We are now going to move into public comment. So tonight we both have public comment and we have a public hearing on our budget. So this first public comment is going to be around anything that's not on the agenda, so non-budget items. And as a reminder, here are the kind of guidelines for public comment. So as I mentioned, it's open to anything we are not voting on tonight. The board may not respond to any comments, and please refrain from responding in the audience. No complaints or allegations will be allowed in public concerning any staff member or any person connected with the school district. To give public comment, please come forward to the podium or raise your hand in Zoom. Please begin by introducing yourself with your name and address. Depending on who raises their hand, we'll alternate in batches here in the room and on Zoom. I will keep the time, and when you've reached 2 minutes and 30 seconds, I'll raise a yellow folder indicating that you have 30 seconds remaining. At 3 minutes, I'll raise a red folder signifying the end of your time. If you get to the end of your allotted time and would like to request more time, you may do so. So with that, I'm going to open up public comment. Okay, just going to give a few more beats to see if anybody online would like to give public comment. Again, this is non-budget related comments. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and close public comment and then move into my remarks. As my 7-year-old reminded me this week on our daily walk to school, there are only 7 more school days until April break. I hope that you are all enjoying the tiny signs of spring and the excitement that is brewing in the air as we transition into more sunshine. Tonight, we'll have the opportunity to hear from the community about the newest version of our budget. The superintendents will be giving more information about how the budget has evolved and what the next steps are later tonight. We'll also be joined by the Alma Advisory Group tonight for a thorough update about our superintendent search, which is going tremendously well. The community has played such an important role in this process so far, and I wanted to let people know about the upcoming ways to continue to be involved. First, you can submit nominations for others or yourself to be on an interview panel for finalists between now and April 17th. That goes for young people and adults across the community. You can also submit potential interview questions for these panels between now and April 26th. As we move closer to finalist interviews, which we hope will be in early May, there will be the opportunity to view live stream and recorded finalist interviews with these panels and provide feedback to the search committee. So please continue to look for updates on the website and across social media platforms. And I think because we have so much budget stuff tonight, I'm going to keep my remarks short and I will turn it over to you. We'll have our paths report next meeting.
Great. Good evening, board members and members of the community joining tonight's meeting. It is amazing, as the chair just remarked, that the calendar's turned to April and that we're under 2 weeks away from spring vacation. We want to take a moment to wish happy holidays to those who will be celebrating Passover and Easter in the coming days. As many of you know, we learned last Tuesday evening that the state had made a calculation error in their determination of the amount of state subsidy that districts across the state are receiving this year. This meant that we will be receiving $3.6 million in more in state funding than we had been anticipating. Portland Public Schools is one of 168 districts that will be receiving more aid across the state for a total of over $42 million additional funding going to schools. We presented a revised budget to the Finance Committee last night, and we look forward to our public hearing tonight on the budget and board discussion during the budget workshop. In our recent staff and community newsletter from this past weekend, we had the chance to highlight the incredible co-curricular opportunities available to our students. These experiences are essential to complement their other academic experiences to support students to become prepared and empowered. Our schools offer a range of opportunities from a radio club at Deering to a fashion and design club at Portland High to the well-renowned Ultimate Frisbee Club here at Casco Bay. We are proud to also offer many identity-based co-curricular groups to support all of the different students we serve in PPS to find spaces and community to connect with and provide support. Our middle schools also offer a fun range of activities to promote connection for students, including Dungeons and Dragons clubs, civil rights teams, and robotics clubs. Thank you to the faculty and staff advisors that support these students with these passions. We are also excited to share that Portland High School Principal Sheila Jepson was recently honored by the Maine Association of School Libraries as Principal of the Year. Portland High Library staff and students nominated Ms. Jepson for this award. They recognized her support of a library that meets students' needs and her commitment to providing resources that allow students to learn more about their own histories and to build understanding of diverse perspectives. Congratulations, Ms. Jepson. Leah?
Well, speaking of recognizing people for their amazing work, we are thrilled to be rolling out a new staff recognition program in our Tuesday bulletin that will be hitting people's inboxes as we speak. We are launching the URPPS Award. This recognition is designed as a way for staff to honor another person for their contributions to our district. Any staff in the district is invited to shout out a colleague who's gone the extra mile, taken extra time, extended extra kindness, or whatever people feel is meaningful to celebrate and recognize. We're sharing a link for all staff to use to nominate colleagues. Each month, the Diversity, Equity, and Belonging team will send people who are added to the form a certificate, and then each quarter we'll be conducting a drawing for a gift card to give a few select nominees, thanks to the support from the Foundation for Portland Public Schools. In addition to appreciating the collaboration with the foundation, we're pleased to be using the artwork of one of our own educators, Longfellow PE teacher Simon Williams, for the certificates. Also, we want to make the board aware and the community aware that we're also rolling out the Educator Advisory Committee in the bulletin today. As I mentioned in a past update, we built plans for this committee 3 years ago, but had to put it on pause as our plan launch coincided with the pandemic. This advisory committee is similar to the advisory committees we have with families, parents, and with students. And the purpose is to help shape district-wide strategy by ensuring it's grounded in the perspective from educators on the ground and to hold district leaders accountable to making decisions and advancing strategies that are aligned to our Portland Promise goals. We envision this committee representing a diverse cross-section of our educators. And in the first year, the PEA president, director of BIPOC pathways, and co-superintendents will select from those who expressed interest. And after the first year, we'll hold a process where members of the committee will help select their successors. We envision 2-year terms and a staggered process of people rolling on and off the committee. And we're seeking educators who exhibit a set of characteristics that we shared transparently in the bulletin, including things like being committed to strengthening a culture of one district and collective efficacy, being committed to honoring direct, honest dialogue, and someone who's willing to put their thoughts on the table and is willing to listen and integrate other people's perspectives and ideas. We said a fan of rigorous debate that's not personal. People who have an interest in our instructional and behavioral health strategy and an orientation towards thinking about how we can achieve coherence and consistency in ways that encourage individual creativity. So we aim to establish membership by the end of April and to hold meetings in May and June so as to pass off an established structure to the new superintendent. On that note, we wanted to inform you that our student advisory committee met last week to plan school-based sessions to seek feedback from students to inform our teacher hiring materials and process. In addition, we discussed an idea brought forward by PHS student Miradi Nguala, who proposed ways to recognize teachers by having students share messages and their talents during Teacher Appreciation Week. And then finally, we wanted to let people know that tonight and tomorrow night are Big Night. I learned about Big Night from our teachers and students who've been integrating outdoor learning into our core curriculum. Big Night is a large-scale amphibian migration on the first warm 40-plus degree rainy night or series of warm rainy nights in the spring. Wood frogs and spotted salamanders travel miles through the woods and across roadways to find their vernal pools for spring mating. So for those who are interested and able, you might want to take an evening walk with a flashlight tonight and tomorrow night. Or for those of us who are going to be on the roads past dark, like all of us here, please drive carefully. And that's all we have for tonight.
Watch out for the salamanders, everyone. Beautiful. Thank you for those updates. Now we're going to move on to the report of the secretary. Board, we have several meeting minutes to pass. So first up, we have the consideration and action to approve meeting minutes of March 7th, 2023. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Looking for a motion. Thank you, Board Member Grant. Is there a second? Board Member Opperman. Any questions? Well, hold on. I got to get my Zoom up. Okay, seeing none. Any public comment on the meeting minutes from March 7th? No. Okay, so seeing none by roll call vote, please indicate whether you're in favor of approving the meeting minutes from March 7th. Superintendent Townsend, will you please call the roll?
Yep. Vice Chair Bondo,
Yes.
Member Bryden,
Yes.
Member Figdor, Member Grant,
Yes.
Member Opperman,
Yes.
Member Russell Better,
Yes.
Member Youssef,
Yes.
Member Ellis,
Yes.
Member Amond,
Yes.
Member McLaughlin,
Yes.
Member Santiago,
Yes.
and Chair Lentz.
Yes. So the motion passes unanimously with the students voting with the majority. Now we're going to do this again for March 14th. Is there a motion to approve the minutes for March 14th? Board Member Opperman. Do I have a second? Board Member Grant. Thank you very much. I'll come over here next time. Is any questions? Any public comment? Okay, I'm going to ask you to call the roll again, please.
Great. Vice Chair Bondo,
Yes.
Member Bryden,
Yes.
Member Figdor,
Yes.
Member Grant,
Yes.
Member Opperman,
Yes.
Member Russell Better,
Yes.
Member Youssef,
Yes.
Member Ellis,
Yes.
Member Amond,
Yes.
Member McLaughlin,
Yes.
Member Santiago,
Yes.
and Chair Lentz.
Yes, so the motion passes unanimously with students voting with the majority. And finally, we have the meeting minutes from March 21st. So is there a motion? Thank you, Board Member Bryden, and a second, Board Member Russell Better. Any questions? Any public comment? All right, then seeing none, let's do the roll one more time.
Vice Chair Bondo,
Yes.
Member Bryden,
Yes.
Member Figdor,
Yes.
Member Grant,
Yes.
Member Opperman,
Yes.
Member Russell Better,
Yes.
Member Youssef,
Yes.
Member Ellis,
Yes.
Member Amond,
Yes.
Member McLaughlin,
Yes.
Member Santiago,
Yes.
and Chair Lentz.
Yes, so that motion also passes unanimously with the students voting with the majority. So we're going to close then the report of the secretary and move on to consent items. No consent items tonight?
No consent items.
Okay, beautiful. Then we're going to move on to the public hearing for the fiscal year 24 budget. So just like public comment, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. You'll start by introducing your name and where you live. So if you'd like to give a comment on the budget, you can come towards the microphone, and I'll also be looking on Zoom. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Shoshana Hose. I live at 29 Alden Circle in Portland, and I teach ESL at Portland Adult Education. As some of you know, most academic and workforce teachers at Portland Adult Ed are not covered by the contract with the Portland Education Association. We're paid strictly on an hourly basis and given only the minimal benefits required under federal and state law. Our compensation is, on average, about 2.5 times less than other teachers in the district who are covered by that contract, including some of our colleagues. Earlier this winter, Adult Ed's leadership team appointed a task force to look into a number of issues related to compensation for hourly teachers at Adult Ed. The task force conducted a survey in February, and nearly all of the hourly teachers filled it out. One finding stood out. That's why I'm here tonight with some of my colleagues, to ask you to address an issue on an emergency basis by making an adjustment in Adult Ed's budget. Adult Ed pays hourly teacher 1 hour for prep and administrative work for each 2.5-hour class that we teach. That work that we're supposed to get done in that hour includes planning the lessons, copying materials, correcting homework, contacting students, reading and responding to school emails, entering attendance hours, setting up the classroom that we share with other teachers, and cleaning it up, as well as other activities. The survey found that nearly 80% of teachers work more than an hour on those tasks. Moreover, a majority work twice as much, at least twice as much on those tasks as we are paid for. That means there's about 50 hourly teachers. That means hundreds of hours of work is going uncompensated each week. Federal labor laws require that hourly workers be paid for hours spent on the job. Here is the key sentence from the U.S. Department of Labor. Work not requested but suffered or permitted to be performed is work time that must be paid by the employer. In other words, even if Adult Ed doesn't ask us to put in more than an hour, and as long as it's allowed, and I would argue expected, it must be paid. The district is at risk of a potentially expensive wage and hour claim. I say that because workers are able to go back 2 years when they make such a claim, and the district also can be forced to pay claimants legal fees. I ask you to increase funding for Adult Ed during the next school year so that hourly teachers can be paid for an additional prep hour per class, which is 2 hours per week, because each course meets 2 times a week. That is the right thing to do, both legally and ethically. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one more here in person and then we'll move to Zoom. Go ahead.
Stephen Sheriff of Brackett Street in Portland. First thing is, I was expecting a presentation of the revised proposal before you took public comment. Would be appropriate to do such so that people could actually comment on what is before you. Would encourage you to just make that decision right now to do that. Apparently you care less about what the public's real comments. So I will speak to what I saw in the document. The public may not have seen it because it has only been put online in the last 24 hours. The proposal from the superintendent was to reduce the tax burden by about $1 million. And then the committee decided to add 70,000 to that tax burden. I think you could do better than that. You got an additional $3.6 million from the state of Maine for education funding in what is claimed to be a mistake, but I think is a backdoor way of adding more money to the school budgets across the state. And so I would encourage you to look very hard at the budget you've got in front of you and determine that it makes clear sense to reduce the tax burden by at least another $1 million. Speaking to individual items really makes no sense because you're just going to ignore the comment, and that's all I really want from you, is to reduce the burden by another $1 million. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go online next. Cyrus, Shahan.
Hello.
Yep, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Cyrus Shahan. My pronouns are he, him, and I live in the East End in Portland. And I have two of my tiny humans who go to the East End Community School. And I know that there has been some changes to the budget proposals recently, but I was really distraught and saddened to hear the proposal to cut the community coordinator position, Lauren, the living schoolyard teacher, which is, a science teacher, which Portland ostensibly supports, and 2 teaching faculty. We hear a lot about the Portland Promise, and we even just earlier in this meeting heard about the Portland Promise. And I really don't know exactly what that's supposed to mean. It sometimes seems like it's a cute buzzword, but that these cuts were even proposed lets me know that that what the school board was actually promising to the East End students was, sorry, go ahead.
No, keep going.
That just even the specter of these cuts was a promise to the East End students that their classes would be stuck inside, that they would be devoid of practical community-based education. It would be a promise to the East End students that their classes would be always overfull, that it would be a promise that even though we know that outdoor education is therapeutic and connects students to their environment, that we promise not to give them that we promise that they will not have an educational therapeutic opportunity that tangibly connects them to their community, especially new students to our community. If these cuts were made, then the Portland Promise would be a promise that the East End school would not meet its community's needs, that students would no longer be helped by their schools. It would be a promise that East End staff would be overworked and overburdened. It would be a promise that the East End would no longer have a pedagogical differentiation because teachers would be too overloaded to differentiate in the classroom. Differentiate is crucial for the diverse and expanding population at school. That these cuts were even proposed is actually a promise that when my first grader, who just came yet again home from school saying excitedly, we got another student this week, that I know that the city of Portland is doing nothing to help the East End school be a safe, productive, and educational space for all students, and even for the new ones. That the Portland Promise seems to be that outdoor education is a thing of privilege for private schools. That these proposed cuts will be a promise that Portland will not support new students. It will be a promise that many of these students will certainly fall through the gaping cracks of an overburdened faculty and staff and underfunded community institution. As an educator, I know the immense amount of work it takes to bring a student up to speed in the middle of the school year. So that these cuts were even proposed in a year when regularly every class is getting
30 seconds.
Thank you. That it was that the teachers have no possible need of helping these students in a way that is effective. And if the city ever needs to know where we could get some more money, maybe take away the armored vehicles and tanks from the cops. So if they want to racially profile our community, they can do so on foot in t-shirts instead of in a tank with a gun. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take another set of comments from the room.
Dad, I really love that coffee. Hi,
Go ahead.
my name is Lucy Schulman. I live at 77 Frost Hill Road in Portland. I am a hourly paid ESOL instructor at Portland Adult Education, and I've recently also taken on the role of the Chief HiSET Examiner. This role in particular is very meaningful to me as a GED holder and as a Portland Adult Ed alum. I'm also a member, like Shoshana, of the PAE's Hourly Compensation Task Force, which was formed by PAE leadership earlier this year. I make a non-negotiable $26.78 an hour. Each course I teach includes 5 contact hours per week with only 2 hours of paid prep time. If I were to prep, which includes student outreach, lesson planning, grading, etc., for an additional 2 hours per week, my hourly wage for prep would go down to $13.39 an hour. I'm going to have my master's in teaching by this time next year. I'm definitely worth more than that. Additionally, due to legislative and HR sorcery, I'm not eligible for employer-sponsored health insurance. I'm multiply disabled and a medically needy individual, so this puts me in a very precarious position. I love my job. I love my students, but it's really hard to swallow mortgaging my health to this service and giving so much to the school and my students when I'm not even getting like that basic thing I need to live. Similar issues with health insurance, lack of union representation, and job security represent a serious equity issue at Portland Adult Ed. I don't believe anyone ever purposefully set out to balance the budget by shortchanging adult education teachers, but the reliance on hourly staff to keep our programming flexible and expecting us to do much of the same work as our contracted colleagues for less compensation is the definition of systemic inequity. In addition to not being in line with the commitment to equity of the Portland Public Schools, this systemic inequity is a barrier to the employment of certain marginalized groups with Portland Adult Ed. The hourly teacher status quo is hostile to disabled people through the lack of health insurance. It's hostile to non-traditional family structures, such as single-parent households who may not be able to support their children through employment with our workplace, and the households of LGBT plus people who may not have access to health insurance through a parent or spouse, and in the case of trans people, may really need that medical coverage. It affects our ability to hire non-citizens without affecting their eligibility for permanent residency due to not being full-time. I could go on, but I only have 3 minutes. I'm here tonight to ask that the school board approve the recommendations of the Hourly Compensation Task Force and increase Portland Adult Ed's budget to allow hourly teachers to be paid for all the hours we prep for class. While this systemic problem requires a long-term systemic solution, this would be an act of good faith that would validate our concerns, increase morale, and demonstrate commitment to addressing this urgent issue. In the face of a significant, I'm almost done, I promise. In the face of a significant language barrier, such as the one in my classroom, one often has to communicate one's feelings through a purer form of expression, one's actions. My students validate me every day through their hard work in their classroom, their positive attitude towards learning, and in the example that they set for their children, many of whom are also Portland Public School students in pursuing their education. And I'm powerfully certain that my students don't want their success to come at the cost of my exploitation. A common response to this sort of teacher complaints in this country is that we should, think of the students. And I encourage everyone to do that and to please imagine in return what our students think of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, may I make a request to the superintendents? I wonder if you could share with us a copy of the Hourly Compensation Task Force report.
We do not have a formal copy of the final report from the task force.
Okay. Is there some version of it that you might be able to share with us?
I'll email Dr. Yamamoto to see what's available.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Sure. Hi, my name's Andy Jackson. I live at 65 Sterling Street on Peaks Island. I have 2 kids in the Peaks Island Elementary School, and my comments are in the context of my understanding that one of the budget line items is a consideration of whether there should be a full-time social worker on Peaks Island or a part-time social worker shared with other mainland schools. And whenever we Islanders consider school questions, one of the first things that always pops in our head is that although I can't really prove it mathematically, I would bet money that we pay a lot in taxes, considering how many students are in our school. And we're happy to do that under the assumption that some basic, services would be provided. We've been without a full-time social worker for 4 months. The social worker, as you know, helps students who are dealing with mental health issues, emergency issues. If they do something that they really shouldn't in school, if they run away from class, the social worker's there to help with all those situations. And it just, we need a full-time social worker who's there 5 days a week, who has the continuity with the kids that they really need to earn the trust. Someone who kind of pops in and out just isn't going to work very well. And especially if there's any kind of emergency or crisis situation, if a kid's really having an acute issue, it's really hard to imagine calling the mainland and getting a water taxi and bringing someone out to the island who maybe they barely know. And it's just not really a recipe for success. So my request is to support the full-time social worker on Peaks Island. We feel like it's an important and really necessary part of the educational environment there. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go to Heather Wood on Zoom now. Go ahead, Heather.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Heather Moore-Wood. I live at 118 Brentwood Street in Portland. I just have a couple of quick things I want to say. First is just an acknowledgement. I know a lot of kids are struggling right now post-pandemic, and when kids are struggling, our schools and their staffs are. I to Portland public school teachers, and especially those at Deering High School and Portland High School, where my kids go to school, and they're having great years. And I just want to acknowledge the hard work of everyone in the school system and those teachers. So thank you for that. I'm a teacher and leader at Portland Adult Education. I know there are so many pressures on the budget, but I want to call attention to the critical role our school plays in educating the adults in our community, for our community, and for the workforce on a fraction of the Portland schools budget. And I want to highlight the points that my colleagues Shoshana and Lucy said earlier, which is, though I am lucky to have a full-time position at my school, a majority of our teachers work hourly. And they are not compensated for the hours that they work to teach in our school fully. They're not fully compensated for that. And so I just want to say we really can't run our great school without these hourly teachers. And so I'm asking for your support in solving that problem in our school. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Come on up.
Hello, I'm Bridget Kahn. I live at 88 Kent Street in Portland. And I'm also a teacher at Portland Adult Education with Lucy and Shoshana and Heather. And like Heather, I am a contracted teacher there. I am a department chair lead, and I'm on the district's equity team, as well as the hourly teacher compensation task force that you've been hearing a lot about today. And so we just wanted to share with you what we have been learning and thinking about. We have about 60 teachers at Adult Ed, and less than a third of those are contracted staff, and the rest are hourly temporary workers. So as you heard, that means that they are not eligible for benefits, retirement, health insurance. Some of them have been working with us for multiple decades and are still considered temporary workers. These teachers are vital for our staff. I hope there's a day when all of our staff can be contracted and full-time, and it can be seen as a professional career. But until that time, we know that we need the 60% of our teachers who are hourly, and we need them to be paid well. we also know that diversifying our staff as a district is a huge goal, and making sure that our teachers are representative of our students. And that can't happen if our teachers aren't paid a livable wage. And so that's a big reason why Abby Yamamoto, our director, has allowed us to create this task force. She understands the importance of it. And so there's a lot of issues around making sure that people's wages are comparable. We found in our task force that actually Portland Adult Ed is the lowest paid for adult ed workers in the Southern Maine. You would think we might be the highest. So there's a lot of issues that we want to address. But what we found in our survey is that currently teachers are working hours they're not getting paid for. And if we've created a system where they are hourly workers, then they need to be paid for the hours that they work. So that's why, where we know that we have big issues in the future to tackle, and I hope, I assume we'll be back here advocating for that too, but it's right now, it's this year's budget that we're looking at that we need to rectify a wrong. So it's not about increasing Portland Adult Ed's budget, it's about making sure that our teachers are paid for the time. And it's not, as you've heard, it's not a lot of time, but it's, instead of 2 hours for prep, it's 4. So it's double. It's a huge amount of time and a huge amount of money for these teachers. And it will mean that they are recognized for the work that they do as professionals. So I just hope that you'll consider that. And I also wanted to say the reason why you don't have a report is that we don't have one, because actually our work was meant to be much longer. And then we found out this information and we felt like we couldn't sit on it anymore. And we knew this budget process was going. So we hope to have a report, and we would love to share that with you. But right now we knew this was urgent and we wanted to share it. So thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to make a comment on the budget? If so, please come forward or raise your Zoom hand. Okay, beautiful. So we got lots of Zoom hands that just popped up. It looks like East End Community School PTO representative. Go ahead when you're ready.
Hi, thank you. My name is Aoife Nugent. I'm on the East End Community School PTO. I have a second grader who is in East End Community School, and I will have a rising pre-K student next fall. And we are such proud members of this community. My son has an IEP, and I have seen the effort that goes into maintaining his exemplary education in the least restrictive environment. Hold on, baby. And I see all the work that goes into that. And I see how the staff works so hard for the students at East End Community School. And as Cyrus put so eloquently before me, East End has more English learners than all but one elementary school district. And we have more economically disadvantaged students than any other elementary school in the district. And we just wanted some clarification in what East End stands to lose with this budget. We were told that there were 2 classroom teachers that could potentially be lost for our school, and our garden educator and community coordinator. So as I know, Portland Promise has been mentioned before, but to eliminate factors that contribute to variable rates of student success and participation, this is the district's first goal in the Portland Promise for equity. And this is completely against the measures that would be taken at East End School. So just to get some clarification in what will be lost or has been reinstated for East End. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're going to move next to Sharon and then Trace. So Sharon, if you want to come whenever you're ready.
Hi. Yeah. Actually, can we ask questions during this section? Can you, I have the same question that Aoife just asked.
Yes, the board will not be able to respond to those questions in the moment, but they can certainly sometimes inform kind of our conversation later. You're welcome to ask any questions that you like.
Okay, I have the same question. So it's not, my name is Sharon McGully. I live at 23 Cumberland Avenue, and I have a student at East End Elementary School also. And it's not completely clear to us whether with this newest budget proposal, whether the 2 classroom teachers, the community coordinator position and the outdoor educator position are under consideration for being cut for our school in the upcoming year. So I'll just speak to it a little bit either way. In learning about the different, in researching for this budget proposal and the different things that were proposed, I learned about some of the differences in class sizes in elementary schools throughout our district. And our wealthiest, most resourced elementary school has some of the smallest classrooms, which is largely because smaller schools have a harder time cutting classrooms logistically, and we do understand that. But it leaves me asking some questions. When schools like East End, our school has the most disadvantaged financial population, the most diversity, and second to most English language learners of all of our elementary schools, has much bigger classrooms than other wealthier, less diverse schools. I don't think this should push us to remove resources from the smaller schools, but I do want to use it to spotlight our goals as a district. If equity is our goal, then bringing class sizes in the largest, most complex, most diverse schools with the greatest needs should strive to have the smallest classrooms. And I hope to see that this current budget proposal is aligned with these important goals and values. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon. We're going to go to Trace or Tracy next, and then Amy. Go ahead, Trace or Tracy.
Hi, I'm Trace. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. I would like to thank the school board for giving us this opportunity to speak. And I'd also like to thank my esteemed colleagues who are there in person to speak on behalf of all the hourly staff at Portland Adult Ed. I'm honored to be a member of that hourly staff for the past 8 years. And as you've heard, I'm paid $26.78 per hour. Nearby adult ed programs, as well as national data about other adult ed teachers' pay, found that in 2021, the mean hourly wage for adult ed teachers in all these programs nationwide was closer to $29.16. And in fact, here closer to home, the Cumberland County Adult Ed program hourly wages range from $25 to $30 per hour, with most programs paying more than PAE. You've heard this before. The PAE pays our hourly teachers for far less than the amount of time that we put in for planning lessons, correcting homework, contacting students, responding to email, entering all the administrative information that's required for our school. And the survey that you've heard about, that hopefully you'll get to read about in a report, shows that, close to 80% of our teachers work more than an hour on these admin tasks. And a vast majority of our students our teachers work almost 2 hours, twice as much as we're paid for. So that means we're working in a way that is expected of us. And we're quite frankly, humbled in a way to perform this work, because we are dedicated to our students in this vibrant part of our learning community. So that means that hundreds of hours of work is going uncompensated each week. And for that reason, we are asking you to please increase the funding during the next school year, fiscal school year, so that hourly teachers can be paid for that additional prep hour per class per week. You've heard it before. We're not asking for anything unreasonable. We are here as teachers and key supporters of this beautiful and promising part of our community. And we're asking you to please provide us with the equity with our colleagues who are contracted or full-time employees, so that we can be prepared and empowered as the Portland public school system purports to hold as a goal. So I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to speak up with my other colleagues. And I forgot to mention that I do have a residence on Peaks Island at 332 Central Avenue. So as a new Portland resident and a longtime Portland adult ed teacher, I'm asking for your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Trace. Amy, you're going to be next, followed by Jessica.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to thank you for having this hearing and listening to so many very thoughtful people who have really done their homework, and I'm so impressed. I'm a teacher at East End Community School. I don't live in Portland, but I've taught school in Portland for 32 years. And I'm very proud of our district. I think we do great work, and I know everyone's working so hard, and I really appreciate that, and it's what keeps me coming back. The PTO has already expressed concerns that I agree with, and I just wanted to add a couple of things for consideration. We look at class size, we need to look at more than numbers. And if you look at the data of our school, you'll see that our kids are struggling to succeed. And part of why they're struggling is that they've experienced quite a bit of trauma, either because they're refugees or because of COVID and missed schooling. And so that's one of the factors we need to consider and why we need to look at smaller class sizes, because these kids need a lot of attention. They need a lot of love and support in order to regulate and be able to focus on academics. So that's one thing I think we should take another look at is class size. And we also, as much as I love the people and the programs of Breathe and Baxter, I think it might be time to consider moving them to another space. You know, the kids in those programs are very needy, and when you add that into a class that's already at least half of the kids are not fluent in English. And if you look, I work with fourth grade this year. So if you look at fourth and fifth grade, we have many kids. I mean, you can look at the data that are 2 or more years below grade level. If we're going to catch those kids up, if we're going to, you know, get them to middle school and keep them from dropping out of high school, they need to make accelerated progress now. And the teachers are really under a lot of stress. And I hope that you'll think about that as you reconsider this budget. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy. We're going to go to Jessica now and then Damon.
Hello. My name is Jessica Mill-Neal, and next year I will have 2 students at the East End School. I live on Smith Street. I just want to say we feel very lucky that the East End is our neighborhood school. The administrators and staff are committed, responsive, and loving. I want to, what I hear Amy, the last teacher, saying is that she is really under-resourced, and instead of seeing Breathe and Baxter be moved elsewhere, I would like East End to really be given the resources that it needs to succeed. And I will say that one of the things I'm most concerned about is class size. East End is one of the elementary schools with the highest fluctuations in enrollment over the course of the year. And I'm concerned that setting teacher levels to maximum classroom size will result in overfull classrooms at other times of the year. And this has been a big problem in the past, and it has even greater potential to be a problem next year. So I would like you to keep class sizes below the maximum levels throughout the school year. And instead of considering it on one day, think about the potential for growth and historical growth in each school, because East End sees more fluctuation in enrollment than other schools do. Additionally, I know that the community coordinator position was possibly going to be cut, and it's essential at the East End School. Ms. Lauren has so many roles that make East End a school that we brag about to our friends, from distributing food and clothing to compiling community resources for parents. I hope that in the future, if the community coordinator position comes under the chopping block again, it will not be cut unilaterally and instead applied to the schools where the community coordinator is meeting the highest need. Lastly, I would like to see our teachers paid enough, and they can't serve our kids if they're not being paid properly, our kids and our adults. And with that in mind, and all of the other things I have asked for, I would like to see the superintendents and the school board ask for the budget that they actually want in order to achieve their goals, rather than the one that is politically expedient. I disagree with Stephen Scharf that you should reduce the budget more and reduce the tax burden more. I do not think that it was like $35 would be the difference in the million that you're taking off. That I would so prefer that go to my kids' school than to get that back in my taxes. And if we want people to keep sending their kids to Portland Public Schools, we really just have to pay for them. And people want to pay for good schools. So, and if you put that budget forward, I am willing to advocate for that budget with the city council, and with me and all my friends. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica. Damon?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you for holding this hearing tonight and all the work you do on behalf of our children on the school board and all the educators here and staff who are listening. Really appreciate that. I live on Bolton Street in District 3. And first of all, I'd like to advocate for you to try to retain at least something of the garden educator positions. I understand there's some tough choices to be made and a lot of critical needs. I want all of our teachers to be paid more. I think it's really important that we don't increase class sizes, but to completely cut that program would really lose a lot of momentum. They've brought in some grant money. They've really built up the grounds and established permaculture at school sites. And I just think it would be a shame to lose that momentum. So try to retain that at least at some level. I think that would be great. A really important goal. I think also that I'm going to just say I think it's okay to increase the property tax rate. I'll say my family lives in a single family home. We make under the median income. And we qualify for the property tax fairness credit, and so would a lot of other people, and a lot of other people do. And I think not increasing the rate when inflation is so high is really just a cut to education, and I don't think that's fair to our kids. And I think it is, as the previous speaker said, something that people are willing to pay for. And so I think you should have some political courage. I'd be happy to also advocate for that before the council. And then in June, when it's time to vote on the school budget, and I think that you'll find that Portland's people are with you on that. And go ahead, and I think that $1 million can be far better spent on our students than spread out in $35 average payments to homeowners and property owners. So I think that's the prudent thing to do. Try to maintain small class sizes, try to make sure that you can keep some of the critical programs funded through the COVID grant money, such as the Garden Educator Program. So again, thank you all for everything you do. And I hope you'll use the money windfall that we've got from the state recalculation wisely to invest in our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Damon. We've got Katie West next. And if there's anybody else on Zoom or in the room that would like to give comment, please raise your hand or come forward. Go ahead, Katie.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for holding this hearing tonight. I am the Outdoor and Experiential Learning Coordinator for the Portland Public Schools, and I'd love to speak specifically about the Living Schoolyard program, the teachers, and the broader intent of the program. And I could speak for many minutes about the letters, notes, and stories of joy and advocacy that I receive about this program and the positive response and its benefit to students' mental health, social, emotional, achievement-focused behavior, shared experience, beneficial for language acquisition. But what I'd really love to do is just spend a couple moments building knowledge, because as you know, we hear different words said: garden, outdoor learning, living schoolyard. And I just want to really share that there is not a name change, but it's a part of an evolution of this program, because we're a part of a national conversation in which there is there's a Living Schoolyard Act before Congress right now, and Maine DOE has hired a climate education specialist that's going to be handling all the funding that's going to be coming down federally through different streams, that is a part of really recognizing the severe environmental crisis that our students will be inheriting. And so the Living Schoolyard program is really both about, what started as the mental health, well-being, and safety from COVID, and as a part of an evolution that all of our students will need to be thinking about as future citizens and community members. And so that program, just so I can spell it out a little bit, has 7 parts. And those 7 parts, one is garden, which you hear about. We know that urban centers around the country have successful programs for many years, but it's also about food systems, food justice, and food security, which is very important as we look at the insect, what scientists call the insect apocalypse. It's really important that students have a sense of where their food comes from and the empowerment to grow their own food. The second component is schoolyard habitat and ecosystems, which broaden and deepen their relationship to the core curriculum and their studies there. Environmental literacy practices are the third, which helps to establish the building blocks of environmental behaviors. And we know that children who are involved with the world around them become adults who have what are called pro-environmental behaviors. The fourth is climate resilience, and the fifth is green careers. And we know that we need greater representation in green careers. And we also know that it's the school day where kids can get this access and exposure. And for example, renewable energy has grown as a field 237% in the last 5 years. So we want to make sure that all of our children are having access to this possibility as they grow. And then the fourth is infrastructure and designs. And there's a national, international movement that really sees our schoolyards as not only green spaces in the community, but climate safe spaces. And so students are part of that redesign. And then the last is community engagement. And so these Living Schoolyard teachers are doing quite extensive work that as we redesign the model with 4 teachers going across 8 schools, it provides more equity across the district, so all students are exposed, but also helps to increase teacher planning time, which is a real need with the initiatives that we have before us in the district. So I just want to thank you for the support you've offered so far, and I really hope that Portland can stay in this position where we're helping lead our community and the nation in what is going to be a very severe environmental time ahead, but helping our students see the possibility and be equipped to do so. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie. I see Michael's hand. Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you. My name is Mike Dixon. I live on Monument Street. I'm the parent of one rising first grader, one rising preschooler in Portland Public Schools, namely at East End. I want to thank you all very much. I know you're all under a great deal of pressure, given this quick turnaround based on a huge information gap. I do want to echo, though, that I think process matters, and I'm really, I'm disappointed that we don't know more about what this budget revision looks like. I was never publicly notified of last night's meeting. I never received slides about it until it was not on the board calendar. I didn't get slides about it until today, and I don't really understand those slides because you haven't taken the time to present them. Not even the sort of difference between the original proposal and this current proposal. I understand the time pressures you're under, so I thank you for doing everything you're doing. Substance-wise, I'm really grateful to see some really key positions back in this proposed budget, positions that I was really concerned about, if I understand it correctly. So I would really love to get some of those questions that have already been echoed by my colleagues, or my neighbors, I should say, about whether we actually are going to have those to imperiled positions at East End restored, whether we're actually going to have a community coordinator restored in this budget, whether we're actually going to have a living schoolyard educator restored in this budget. I think I'm reading that correctly, but I would love confirmation, and I hope the board will discuss that in a moment. I was here talking to you all a year ago about the importance of living schoolyard educators, quoting Portland Public Schools. Our robust outdoor learning program has been cited as a model nationwide. Outdoor learning is important for all students, and especially for many PPS students that do not have equitable access to green spaces, etc. On and on and on. These are your own words. I implored you to put this position into the actual mainstream locally funded budget. Many of you promised that that would be the effort. I was really disappointed that it was instead looking like it was going to be on the chopping block. I'm really grateful that it's back in, although I notice that it seems to be ESSER funded, which means it's going to be imperiled again next year. So I really implore you to put that back in as a top priority for all the reasons you've already heard. I also implore you not to break the Portland promise. We've heard a little bit about that. The Portland promise is about achievement, cutting the very people who specifically tend to the needs of the whole child, and making sure they're seen and known that they have sufficient food, clothing, and guided time to explore the environment and relationship outdoors does not make any child achieve more and doesn't make them feel like a whole child. We hear a lot about people. Cutting people doesn't help those people or the people experiencing the loss, and these are essential people in our schools. And let's remember that equity is not about doing the same thing for everyone across the board. It's equity is about doing what's truly fair, making sure that the most resources go to the most in need. Across the board percentage cuts, like that 5% cut, have a disproportionately negative impact on students with the highest needs. That's the opposite of equity. Cutting all the community coordinators is the opposite of equity because it has a disproportionately negative impact on the kids most in need. Cutting all the living schoolyard educators has a disproportionately negative impact on the kids most in need. East End has more English learners.
Time, Mike, would you like some more time?
Yes, please, if you wouldn't mind. Sure.
Yeah, go ahead. 30 more seconds.
Okay, thanks. Wrapping up. East End, as you've heard, has more English learners than all but one elementary school in the district, has more economically disadvantaged students than any other elementary school in the district, and is the most diverse student population of any school in the district, elementary, middle, or high. In a district where equity is supposed to be the primary goal, East End Community School cannot afford to lose any student-facing staff. Please protect those positions that I think you've put back in the budget. And finally, with the pandemic waning, we can finally begin to reconnect schools and community for the benefit of our children. And as a parent and member of the PTO trying to bridge the gap that opened up during the pandemic, I implore you not to let anybody cut our community coordinator just as volunteers are actually coming back to the school, just as we want to start a walking school bus again that we used to have. And do not cut our living schoolyard educator just as we've raised funds to improve our greenscapes outdoors, which are critical for our school. And we have 30 brand new volunteers who are all like begging to help out with that. These are imperative connections between our community and schools, and please protect those. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. Okay, is there anybody else in the room that would like to give comment? Anybody else on Zoom? Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and close this portion. And we are going to go ahead and move to new business, which is the first read of the proposed budget. Superintendents, pass it to you for any comments.
Oh, the workshop? Yep. Oh, for the first.
Because she was doing first read process.
Yeah, well, have comments at the workshop.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, so then, so then we're just going to roll into the workshop. There we go. Perfect.
Great. Hold on a second. Okay, so as far as the workshop here, so this is many of the board members. I know we saw you at the finance committee meeting last night. So we're going to step through basically the same presentation with an update based on the amendment that was made last night. Do want to acknowledge some of the comments that were made pertaining to process. I think we typically do the process this way, and admittedly, getting last minute news to change the budget and try to add in the meeting we did last night is new and different. So we are going with our past practice, but here are the feedback on that. And I do think we also wanted to make sure we were hearing commentary from the public. So when you all get to questions and discussion, you're informed by some of the questions and concerns that the public is raising. So in any case, so if you can move it forward. So as far as our agenda flow for this workshop, we're going to start by just briefly regrounding in the budget priorities and strategy that we have articulated to you several times in terms of how we've approached this budget. Then we're going to step through the adjustments that have been made in terms of what happened given the funds from the state post the initial recommended budget that we provided. Talk about how that's affecting the SRF investments that were being proposed. And then we also are adding in a little bit of additional context that was not shared in the Finance Committee last night pertaining to the multi-year planning questions that did come up in committee meeting as we anticipate a funding cliff with SRF and just a significant potential budget gap next year. So that's our process. And so just again, in terms of the priorities for the budget this year, we really are centering the proposed FY24 budget around first maintaining our commitment to the Portland Promise. So not wanting to go backward in our work, but really sustaining and deepening the work we've set out to do as it pertains to achievement, whole student, people, and then equity woven throughout. Secondly, we're focused on being responsive to our evolving context and specifically being responsive to the needs of the many newly arriving students joining our district and our community, most of whom are multilingual learners who need intensive language development. And then thirdly, a priority around improving our operational effectiveness. We've been clear and the entire community's been made aware of the lack of investments and the implications of that in terms of in the case of payroll, but there's other places as well. So it's been a priority of ours in this budget to really look deeply at our operations teams and to make sure that they're resourced effectively. As far as our original strategy or approach to this budget, we set out to preserve core programming aligned to the priorities and do some minimal new investments. We knew this was not a year in a situation where we were going to be able to advance significant new investments. So really it was focusing on preservation and then minimal new investments that were natural evolutions from the work that's underway. Secondly, we plan to leverage our reserves, but to do that with an eye toward a multi-year strategy, understanding that our budget context in the future is also going to be challenging. And so really thinking of a multi-year approach to leveraging the reserves to support the budget. Thirdly, our intention was to leverage ESSER funds while we have them. I think a lot of people have had questions about this part of our strategy because these funds are only with us for one more year. So a lot of questions are understandably coming up as it pertains to the funding cliff with ESSER. In the context of the schools, the ESSER funds are really about recovery. And as we've talked about in past conversations, it's recovery as it pertains to learning as well as mental and behavioral health. And those things don't just get neatly wrapped up with a bow after the grant runs out. And so the kinds of things that are needed in that grant and what's required as far as the requirements of the grant are pertaining to learning acceleration and mental and behavioral health. So we'll talk about this later, but it is true that we anticipate so much of what's in there would be ideal to continue, but we're very aware of the fact that we won't have that money in the future. And so we need to be thinking long-term about how we're going to address the gaps that Miranda shared with you all before. We also made reductions in the original proposed budget in order to bring the tax rate down. I think we were looking at close to 16% tax rate increase if we were to do what we thought we needed to do. So we acknowledged in our first draft that we had to make reductions. And then finally, kind of to what I was alluding to a moment ago, needing to continually highlight for you all the fact that we have to make larger structural shifts given the forecasted budget scenario in the future. So then, as far as the new news, so this is for those of you who are listening, kind of since we got the new information from the state about the additional resources, we obviously took a big step back. And this is the strategy we are trying to employ in making specific choices about how we are going to use those funds. So first, it's been our intention to reduce the tax rate increase from what we originally proposed in the original FY24 budget. Second, our goal was to restore core services that were cut from local, and we'll step through the specifics of each of these in a moment. Third, our intent was to return core services that we'd removed from local and put onto ESSERF and put those back into the local budget. And then finally, that freed up funds in ESSERF. And so we have made some strategic investments that are aligned to our priorities with that freed up money in ESSERF, with the caveat that I just shared about our awareness that that money is with us for just one more year.
Great. Thank you, Malia. So I'll talk through a few of the specific adjustments, based on the new revenue that was announced just a week ago. So our original budget proposal had an original revenue budget of just over $141 million, with the additional state EPS subsidy of $3.6 million. We, as we've discussed, are proposing to reduce the tax levy by just under 1%. With this now incorporates the amendment last night that the Finance Committee passed around adding the pre-K DLL teacher, which we'll get to in a moment. So that brings our revised revenue budget to $143.8 million or $0.9 million, which reduces our tax levy from our original proposal from 7% down to 6.1%. In terms of implications for Portland homeowners, this represents an increase of property taxes of about $161 for the year for a median valued home. So we recognize that and appreciate support that was echoed and concerns that were named about this tax rate, and recognize that this, even at this revised proposal, is a significant contribution from the Portland community for the schools and the education of our little ones. So in terms of some of the moves that Malia spoke to from our strategy and questions that we heard during the public hearing, the first is around restoring back into the local budget a set of positions that we had proposed moving into ESSERF when we anticipated significantly less in state subsidy. So in this revised budget, you'll see that the math coaches, elementary, middle, and high, as well as classroom teaching positions that had been identified, both high school as well as elementary, are moved back to the local budget, as well as the high school youth development positions. So those are 3 Make It Happen coordinators at each of our high schools and the 2 extended learning opportunity coordinators at one at Deering and one at Portland. So those are back in the local expenditure budget in this revised proposal. Additionally, in terms of expenditure adjustments in this revised proposal, as spoken to, we are fully restoring all 3.38 of the community coordinator positions. We're proposing that restoration so that they are fully funded again back in the local budget for the coming year. We've making an additional slight adjustment in cell phone stipends to be targeted around providing our contractually obligated cell phones for those for whom that's required, and not going beyond that. We were reducing to, somewhat the departmental non-personnel cuts that we had proposed. So reducing that from 5% to 4%. And then the last is the amendment last night that was passed as per to our revised budget, which is adding a pre-K dual language teacher to the local budget. So that brings our total to $143.9 million in terms of expenditures. So stepping back in terms of the big picture, overall, that means our revised budget that's in front of you tonight for the first read is a total of $143 million. This represents over an 8% increase in expenditures from last year, totaling almost $11 million. We see the school tax rate increase, as we've named, at 6.1%. Looking at a few of the details as it relates to that, comparing the FY23 budget to FY24, you see, a few shifts from our original proposed budget. Most notably, the salaries and benefits line is up from the original proposed budget, given the restoration of many positions back into the local budget. Specifically, most significantly, the ESSER positions that we moved back. Additionally, you'll see the non-tax revenue increase substantially, given the additional state revenue, right, that we've been discussing, and the property tax levy slightly reduced from the original proposal when it was at 7%. And just to track a little bit, because, as we all know, we've now been through a few different iterations of the budget as we've worked our way through the past few weeks. So this chart just kind of lays out a bit of the adjustments over time so that we can kind of be tracking where we stand now in terms of, this final column, the FY24 Finance Committee approved budget, which is what's in front of us tonight for the first read, and will be forward with us next week in our special meeting for approval. So you can see, the original recommended budget, the revisions that we had in our proposed and summarized then in the middle column of what our recommended budget was, and then the one adjustment that was approved last night in Finance Committee to total our final proposed budget in the FY24 Finance Committee column. As we've discussed, and as appropriate, significant focus and attention on how we are continuing to leverage the ESSER resources that we have available for one more year. Just a quick reminder for all that may not have heard, over time throughout the pandemic, we've benefited from receiving almost $42 million from the federal government in terms of supporting our efforts. Those have primarily gone into kind of two buckets. One, most initially in terms of response to the immediate response to the pandemic. So implementing all the health and safety requirements, facilities adaptations that were required, launching our outdoor learning work, creating the day programming when we had our hybrid year, and so forth. So about half of our resources had gone to the response effort. And now we're in the period of recovery, which again, as Malia named, is not a time-limited thing. Recovery is going to be an ongoing effort, has not been solved in 2 years, and is going to require considerable work. And that's the challenge in front of us as we think ahead to the FY25 budget and the resources that have been invested to support that, and how we may address that moving forward, and how we might prioritize them in reflection upon some of the legacy investments in our local budget. So, but we have been anticipating and still that we would have approximately $7.8 million in ESSER funds to complement our local budget for this coming year. So here, and we'll again go through some detail and hopefully respond and clarify some of the questions that we heard in public hearing. But these are additional ESSER investments out of the money that was freed up by moving the positions back into the local budget. So we had approximately $2.5 million that we had available to invest in the needs and advance our priorities. And so that's summarized here. And so over the next few slides, Malia and I will kind of step through by priority area what those specific additions are and how that's part of the overall package of what we're proposing for both local and ESSER investments for FY24 to advance the priorities that we've talked about.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. And like Aaron just mentioned, the board is voting on the local budget, but we're going into this detail on ESSER because it's part of the holistic strategy as it pertains to how we're able to achieve some of our priorities. But ultimately, what you all will be deliberating and discussing and then voting on is really, I think you have that up on the screen, is really just the local part of the budget that we're talking about this evening. So as far as the additional investments that we were able to fit into ESSER, given what we freed up by moving the previously locally invested things back into local, aligned with our Portland Promise goals are here. So first, we're increasing summer programming back up to 1 million. So just as a reminder, initially we had $3.2 million for the next 2 years for summer. We had cut that down to $900,000. And so we're bringing it back up to 1 million in anticipation of potentially being able to support a couple more community partner opportunities for the secondary students, as well as thinking about the potential to have a glide path toward a much smaller summer program offering next year or the year after the summer, just to be clear. We are putting some additional curriculum investments into ESSERF, specifically around elementary ELA curriculum, English language arts, the secondary health, and then the experiential learning work that's happening in an integrated way across social studies, science, and literacy. This one is great for ESSERF because there's a big upfront investment that won't be recurring. I will say that there's always recurring costs for curriculum, and this ELA investment doesn't get us 100% of the way there. But it is something that, as we anticipate the cliff, we'll definitely be able to scale down in the future. We are putting 4 of the 5 living schoolyard teachers back into ESSER for another year, and working with Katie West, who made comment this evening, and principals and the teachers to do some evolution to how we think of and conceive of that program. And so we're not imagining it as how it is now, where there's a teacher in some of our schools, but rather that the group will be more itinerant, much like our mobile makerspace teacher. And then we're hoping for an additional benefit there in that it frees up classroom teachers for collaborative planning and work, specifically at the elementary level pertaining to ELA curriculum adoption, which is a significant lift. So lots of cool creative thinking there, but it's still in the development stage. We are increasing slightly the allocation toward the mobile makerspace teacher. We very much want to retain this as a full FTE this year. The other 0.5 will have to be grant funded. Funds are not yet identified, but this we felt like helps us out a little bit there. And then we only need to go out and find the 0.5. We're putting a 3.0 FTE ed techs for high schools. That's just a placeholder based on initial conversations within our alternatives to suspension work group. They are meeting monthly and then culminating for a 2-day retreat in June this summer to come out with recommendations based on the work that they're doing. And all along, our intention had been that they would have some budget so that they could actually take action on the recommendations. And so given some of the conversations that are being had, this felt like an appropriate budget amount for them to work with once they get to that final recommendation stage. We had previously had 2 BCBAs and heard feedback last night about acronyms, so appreciated that. So BCBA is a behavioral, consultant.
Board certified behavioral analyst.
I got it before you got it. I'm just kidding. So they work with teachers to help support and consult as it pertains to supporting students with significant behavioral needs. So they would float and be able to be accessed as an expert outside of students with IEPs. So they could work with students that have IEPs, but right now that's really where we focus our BCBA support that we do have. But we have a lot of need beyond students with IEPs. And so they would be able to be accessible for schools to use for consultation. And then finally, another acronym, SEL. I know this one without a prompt, social emotional learning. We had a chunk of money in there for consulting support. We had to remove it with the initial budget that we put out there, and we've restored some of it. This is to be able to continue the work that we've started this year with a partner around the alternative to suspension work group, as well as some work that we're doing in our middle schools as it pertains to professional development. So this is a slide we used before that we just wanted to kind of bring back in front of you so you could see where the changes were. So anything in red indicates a change. So initially, when we presented our FY24 budget to you all, these were the things that we were naming were getting moved forward. And so the local investments haven't changed. The ESSERF investments that are continuing, here you see mobile makerspace was already in there before, but it's red because it's gone from a 0.3 to a 0.5. Summer programming was in there before, but it was at 900. So we changed it, reduction from 3.2 to 1 million instead of to 900,000. And then we're adding the 4.0 living schoolyard teachers. Those have been removed before entirely. Down under mental and behavioral health, you see the one BCBA and those social emotional learning contractual services now showing up as things that are in the ESSERF investments and that are in practical terms continuing because we have them now. And then in the new ESSERF investments, you see reflected, we already had ELA curriculum there. It's turned red because there's more money being allocated toward that as well as toward health. And then down below, you see that new placeholder for the recommendations resulting from the alternatives to suspension work group. And then on the next slide, this was a really big one. The rest of them kind of look, you can see them together, but this was then what was not moving forward in the original budget that we proposed. So again, we're just revisiting this slide and then putting in red anything that was adjusted since we got this new information. And so previously we had curriculum requests around middle school science and health. So some of that increase in curriculum could be allocated there. So we're trying to indicate that. The rest of what's here still remains requests that are not being advanced, just to be clear about that. And then over here on the other right-hand side, these are prior investments that were not funded in the original budget we put forward. And now they're showing up red because either they are funded or a portion of them are funded. And you see that show up there. So we're going to do this for each of our priority areas to try to help you see what's changed. The next I have as well, which is our additional investments in supporting our multilingual learners. I shared this with our committee last night, but basically we had many requests as it pertained to supporting our students who are multilingual learners. And so when we knew we would have some additional funds, many of the board members on the finance committee had requested we contemplate adding back in resources for multilingual learners, and people had named specific things we had talked about before. And so we wanted to really understand what the experts would recommend holistically, knowing we probably couldn't do all of it. And so we pulled together intake team, family engagement specialist team, and a language development team, not full teams, just representatives from these groups to say, okay, let's look back at what we had requested. And if we were to advance more resources to support our students, what would you all recommend? And this is what they are advocating for. So we're putting in 5 FTE of school-based language access. This showed up in our original request as 5.0 language acquisition ed techs. We're in the midst of process to look at a potential kind of tweak to that, where these would be positions that have a role that's at the school level, that's a little bit of a blend of what our language acquisition ed techs and our family engagement specialists do, because our family engagement specialists are really family facing, and then our language acquisition ed techs are student facing. And what we're trying to do is build more language capacity at the school level that can flexibly work with and support families and students. So these would be placed in schools fully, obviously in places that have high multilingual learner populations. The next is a 1 FTE ESOL teacher to be kind of placed once we have more information. We know that we're continuing to welcome students, and that, our ratio-based methodology, we're getting close to that in several different areas. So we envision this being deployed at the elementary level. So that was an add. We have in here 1.6 family community specialists, wanting to be clear that we have a grant from the state right now pertaining to McKinney-Vento that ends in September. So these are people we have right now that we would not have funding for starting in September. So this retains them for the year. And then the final investment you see here is ESOL endorsement coursework. We've been talking about this for years, and then increasingly so recently that all of the teachers in Portland are basically multilingual learner teachers. And so really, we feel everybody here, including ourselves, need to build our expertise and knowledge for how we, meet the needs of multilingual learners. And so this is part of that strategy for anticipating in the future. Can we, if we can't keep adding more and more teachers, like how do we build our capacity as a system? And so really trying to leverage the funds while we have them to design something that is responsive to that need that we could then carry forward. The team is envisioning really starting this work with pre-K, where pre-K instruction is language. They're doing language development instruction for all kids, as well as for our special education programs that are highly individualized already in terms of the teachers' planning and understanding of their students' needs, and then for instructional coaches and academic team members. So similar to how I stepped you through the slide that we had originally shared, and anything in red is a change based on what I just described. You see here up on the top, so local, there is an ad there, the pre-K DLL teacher. This happened last night by the finance committee. They made an amendment and added that position. And then over on the SRF side at the top, you can see each of those additional investments that I just described showing up there. And then on the bottom, what you see is, what we had previously said was requested and not advanced, or had previously been funded and was no longer going to be funded in the future. And anything that's italicized means that it might not be fully showing up exactly as it was asked for, but it's part of that strategy when we ask the team to come together and think holistically about how do we meet the needs of our students. And so you see that there. And Aaron's going to talk through ops.
Great. So just a few additional operational investments that we're proposing to leverage SF4 to respond to some immediate needs. So adding 1.0 computer technician. This is going to help us to reduce the ratio of the distribution of our technicians across schools. And so to be able to provide student and staff support around their Chromebooks and so forth. We've gone one-to-one over the course of the pandemic across all grades. And so the workload has increased substantially for them. And additionally, out of some specific, IT reserves, we're doing some device replenishment because they've gotten significant use for both students and staff. So this position will help us be able to manage that over the coming year as we continue to kind of grow our capacity in terms of how we're utilizing technology. We're proposing to add the requested building and trades worker for the facilities team to help address some backlog of maintenance issues that have been deferred as we focused on pandemic related issues. So hope that we're able to make progress in that, and that potentially is not an ongoing investment that's needed, through the work of the coming year. And then lastly, adding a food service cafeteria manager to respond to the increase in meals that are being served with the universal free breakfast and lunch programs. So as Malia did, you can see those three new investments listed under the SRF column there. We, are retaining all of our other proposed local and SRF investments. And then down below, you can see, specifically I'll call out, we're, proposing the IT ask to get up to the recommended ratio from the kind of consultant work we'd had done. Recommendations that had been provided early on in the pandemic was 3.0 of computer technicians. So, but given the breadth of needs, we're proposing the advancement of one of those positions for this coming year. And then lastly, some of the additional core services investment that we're proposing. So the bulk of this, 4 FTE of classroom teacher and the 1 FTE of the ed tech, is in relationship to some of these increased enrollments. We are identifying schools for which they have grade levels that in the projected enrollments, they were already at the kind of limit in terms of class size. So we're monitoring those and want to be able to have these staffing resources available to be able to reduce those class sizes if the enrollments develop in the way we anticipate. So schools that we're watching for this include Reiki, East End, as noted in the concerns that were raised earlier, Rowe, as well as actually Longfellow. So we'll see as the enrollments continue to progress this spring and be able to have those resources to ensure we remain well within our class size maximums. And for the ed tech at Lyseth, that's a similar need, but unfortunately, they are already at capacity in terms of classroom space. They don't have physical space to add an additional classroom. So this is intended to provide additional support in those K or 1 classrooms if enrollment ends up being at or above the ratios there. The 1.5 FTE of PAE teachers, so certainly heard a lot of concerns shared tonight around the hourly staff. Originally when we started the budget development process, Portland Adult Ed has been working strategically over time to try and add to their contracted teacher staff. And so when we began that work, that was at about the same time that the hourly staff task force that was referred to tonight was just launching. So initially that was for adding additional contracted teachers. Certainly, as that work has progressed, that could be considered to be reallocated to address some of the hourly needs. But we feel the increased investment, adult ed programming has grown, substantially, and they're now coming out of the pandemic, continuing to offer a hybrid model there because they found it really worked for their learners. And then lastly, the additional investment is providing one more of kind of year of release time for the nursing coordinator to be able to provide service across the district. Again, make up ground from, around immunizations, screenings, and other things that were deferred during our focus on the health and safety requirements of the pandemic. She as well provides significant support at our multilingual intake center to ensure they're getting the healthcare needs and are connected to our clinics. For that kind of support and beginning to support and monitor the immunization requirements that students face as they enroll in our schools. So here on the summary page where you see holistically what we're proposing to advance some of our core services, you see many of the things that we spoke about in our initial budget presentation in terms of special ed costs, the school buses, et cetera. You'll see on the local side, the restoration of the community coordinator positions there marked in red, and then the additional ESSERF investments that I just spoke to on the right-hand side. So in sum, just to have a picture, we had the summary slide around our local budget. This is the summary slide around our proposed ESSERF expenditures for the coming year. So here you can see the change from our original budget, the proposed changes, and ultimately the total by priority area in terms of how we're anticipating using what the bulk of what remains of our ESSERF resources. So next, I'm going to invite Budget Director Miranda Fasulo forward to talk us through some of the questions that emerged last night about how the change in state subsidy may be impacting our thinking about multi-year planning.
Yes, thank you, Superintendent Townsend. So yes, I was asked by several committee members last night, about what the impact the news from the state with respect to our funding for this year, what impact that might actually have on our funding for next year as well that we had looked at previously in a committee meeting. So I'm going to walk you through some funding scenarios. So I know some of you are familiar with this slide because you attended the Finance Committee meetings. Some of you may not be familiar with this slide. So I'm just going to kind of orient you to it to begin here. So everything above the gray line there is our historical funding. So since 2019 from the state. And then everything below is a scenario or potential scenario for 2025. So you're seeing the fiscal year, you're seeing the EPS operating allocation, and then you're seeing the EPS valuation, the EPS mill rate, and together, those two things come to basically multiply them together and you get the EPS local expectation. And then our subsidy is actually determined by subtracting that EPS local allocation from the operating allocation. So that's our subsidy in the EPS subsidy column. And then the change column shows you what the change was year over year historically. So 2024 is the budget year that we're talking about. So you can see now with the state adjusted funding that we actually received an increase of funding over last year by about 1.2 million. So I just want to make clear that there were a couple of one-time adjustments that includes. So there was a debt service adjustment that happened between 2023 and 2024 of about $1.1 million. So really that comprises the majority of that increase you're seeing. That's not actually an increase to our core subsidy funding. Additionally, we have funding for buses in this year. So taking that out, which is, kind of extra on top because we applied for a specific bus purchase. We really didn't, have funding added through the core formula this year. We did get more money and we're able to use it. So it's a good thing, but reflective of kind of the trend in subsidy, it's really pretty much level funding for this year in terms of our core funding. So looking at the scenarios, I had some different scenarios previously because the situation has changed. So scenario 1 is not a scenario that's going to come to fruition, but it's there just so you can see precisely how much our valuation going up drives our formula down. So that is holding all factors equal except for our increase in EPS valuation, which you can see goes from 11.25 billion to 12.7 billion for next year. And that's known. So that's what's concerning. And that would drive our funding, all else equal, down by almost $10 million. So I say that's not going to happen only because a minimum receivership should kick in before then, right around that funding level, though, unfortunately, which I'll get to the minimum receiver scenario in a moment. But that's really just for illustrative purposes to show you just how much that valuation impacts the funding. So scenario 2 is really a scenario if things turn out like FY24. So increase that's similar to what we saw between FY23 and FY24, and a mill rate drop, which is similar to what we're seeing between FY23 and FY24, because that's what just changed in terms of the state funding. The mill rate went from an expected 7.29 to what's 6.97 now. So it's a massive difference. Instead of going up, it went down. And so that's now a much more, so being like FY24 is a much better thing for next year than it would have been in the previous scenario where the mill rate went up. So that's pretty much explains the slide. So I think what I kind of want to say is the correction to our funding changes kind of things for next year in 2 key ways. So it makes it more likely that the mill rate will continue to drop. And it makes sense that the mill rate would drop as valuation across the state, not just ours, is increasing, though ours is still rising faster than most. It was concerning that the mill rate initially didn't drop. And it implied that those valuation increases across the state weren't enough to fund the increased cost of education and still bring the mill rate down. But now I think it's reasonable to think that it will. It's not guaranteed, but it's reasonable. And so really what it does is make the like 24 scenario much more favorable, where previously the like 24 scenario dropped us to minimum receivership. So that's the good news. I think that the not so good news is that it drops our floor, which is the minimum receiver scenario, to be now $3.6 million further away. So where previously I had presented that, kind of our worst case scenario was a loss of funding of about $5.7 million. Now our floor of minimum receivership is a loss of funding of $9.3 million, as you can see at the bottom line there and the slide you're looking at. So it's a good thing because our funding level is higher, but it just continues to add to our year over year volatility and unpredictability. So I think overall, obviously it's good news for, the coming budget year. I think it should be good news for next year, but it also adds a level of uncertainty. So that's kind of in sum how I'm looking at that for next year. So now I'm really just going through kind of the slides that we did at the last workshop, updated to now show, instead of that kind of pessimistic minimum receiver scenario, I'm inserting here kind of what I would consider a somewhat realistic scenario for EPS funding. Again, I can't say enough that I don't know what the funding is going to be next year. There's a lot of different ways it could go. We could have less of an allocation increase. We could have the mill rate go up or hold steady, but in the like 24 scenario that I put forth in the prior slide, we would see a funding loss of about $4.3 million. And then we have the rollover costs that we've talked about before, debt service, our slate of ESSER programming. That would certainly be a topic of conversation for next year. So we could be looking at, a fairly similar gap to what we've discussed before, and in the ballpark of $19.3 million. So all else equal, that would imply a tax rate increase of about 17%. So this slide you've also seen before, it just shows kind of the scale of reductions that would be necessary to reach these different tax rate levels, starting from that all-in budget on the prior slide. So to get down from, the 16.6 tax rate increase, we'd need to cut about $8.5 million worth of programming to get to 9%, $10.75 million to get to 7%, and about $13 million to get to 5%. And here again is just a list that we've shared previously around structural shifts that will need to be on the table and taken up in terms of planning sooner rather than later in anticipation of an extremely challenging budget year next year. And so that's not the topic for this evening, so I'm not going to go through all of these, but it's here again for your reference and to keep in mind as we continue through the rest of this year's process. So I get to do the calendar slide tonight. My first time of the season. All right. So where are we? It is April 4th. So we're actually making our way through this calendar. We have this Thursday, April 6th, joint finance committee with the city. And that's remote, I believe. I'm not sure of the timing off the top of my head, but I'm sure it's posted online.
6:30 is the joint.
Excellent. And then the school board vote on April 11th. Followed by the city council vote on the 15th and the public referendum on June 13th. And I think that's it for tonight. We can turn to questions.
Beautiful. Thank you so much again for that great presentation. And just to acknowledge the super quick turnaround that had to happen to get us to this point. So I'd now like to open it up to any questions on the board. I know a lot of you were there last night, so and asking questions then, so we may not have too many tonight. Vice Chair Bando, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I have a few clarifications, questions here. I think I have three. I'm going back to the East End Community School. When I look at the budget, we have 2 position teachers, and we are cutting in the local budget, right? And then when I look at the enrollment, we have 390, if I'm not mistaken, right? For 20. And then when I heard the superintendent, Aaron just mentioned about, and we watching those schools with 4.0 FDs, then we just put on hold just to watch during the spring, how the enrollment is going to those schools. So I just want to see the time frame, because we are cutting 2 positions with 2 teachers, but because on the enrollment, and we holding some space to add some teachers if we need it. So I just try to see the time frame while we're thinking, because it's already spring, and then we have a lot of new arrivals are coming. I'm sure they're going to end at the East End School or Rocky or some schools. So those are areas that I was thinking. So, and I'm thinking that are we going to be able to, why are we not holding those 2 teachers and making sure that we can hold those space? Because when I look at the capacity that we have, if I remember, we have 2 more space available in East End to add some more classes, right? So if we're cutting those positions, we know now to try to spread those students to other classes to increase the size classes, and then adding more support to those classes. So I'm asking, what's the best approach, thinking about holding those teachers so we can have a balance on the size class, instead just to watch the spring, because we're almost going at the end of the school.
Yeah, we're monitoring the enrollment, every 2 weeks in terms of enrollment reports, and we'll make decisions. For example, Reiki, with its new enrollments already exceeded some of the anticipated projected enrollments, and so confirming that, and I anticipate that will be there shortly for East End. I think in regards to the question about the 2 versus 1, it really is right now 1 grade level, and the students matriculating forward by a grade. There's really 1 grade level that we're primarily concerned about, and that's at their kindergarten level, to ensure, that they're going to have enough space to take in both neighborhood students and any new arrivals there. So that's what we're focused on as it relates to East End. But I think, we're projecting sufficient capacity to be able to welcome new students and additional grade levels moving forward in East End, even with the 1 if we end up with just a net of 1 reduction at East End.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you. So my second question is about the 5 point FD's EdTech on the school-based language access. Those gonna be the multilingual EdTech or is gonna be the mainstream EdTech?
So those were initially proposed as language acquisition ed techs who are multilingual. We're in the process of a collaborative effort between Grace's team and Carlos and Jane to try to create this role that I mentioned that's language access at the building level. So all those people would need to be multilingual, and we'd be hiring for the major languages.
Okay, thank you. Going back to adult education, I just wonder how many, and I think I heard, but maybe I forget how many teacher EdTech then we have hourly pay, and if we have a reason why those hours or on the prep time when never been paid or never been reported. I just need to have some clarification on that.
Yeah, and this just to respond to some questions that came up last night. So we have approximately 20 FTE that are contracted teachers at Portland Adult Ed and roughly 52 hourly teachers that work. And so the hourly teachers may range from just having one course to what would be considered a full load, which is 4 courses per term. So it really varies in terms of how much, those individuals are carrying. And I think, I've gotten a little bit of a briefing about, kind of the history. Certainly the history of the hourly, teacher construct goes back many, many years at Adult Ed. And I think even predates that, in some communications we saw from some of the leaders in that group, right, to, an era when it was considered volunteer work, right? And at one point about 20 years ago began to compensate staff for that, for that work, to begin to kind of make it more routine and sustainable. Certainly, clearly work to go. The tension is, the challenges with the overall Portland Adult Ed budget, right? And how much, they get in terms of state subsidy and how reliant overall they are on grants. And so, it has been, as I think I mentioned at one point earlier, a strategic goal to continue to increase the number of contracted teachers in the building, but to be able to, in the expansion of programming and the numbers that they serve, there's just a tension in terms of how much we're able to address, be able to maintain our current level of programming with the level of resources that are available at Adult Ed. So they've made progress over time. Certainly additional grant funds have been able to support some of that growth. But, as we move forward, there were under Anita St. Ange's leadership, there was an initial pay raise that happened. And then over the past couple of years, there's been a small cost of living adjustment that's been commensurate with other cost of living adjustments in the district that have been applied for hourly teachers. But the kind of formula in terms of the hours of prep, for the classes has been what it's been for some time. And that's certainly one of the issues that the task force is looking at. And it's not clear, I certainly heard that from them, this evening. They've had, discussions about whether as well, there would be increases in the rate of pay, right? And just all of the net summary of what that may mean, is still, kind of in process, as we heard, in terms of them finishing their report. So we continue to work with Portland Adult Ed leadership as this work has kind of evolved over the past few weeks.
All right. Thank you. Just want to get some on how many of the school have been receiving the Title I fundings? And if we have something coming up, any news since last time, how many school can be served under that Title I for the fiscal year?
Yeah, I can, Gail, text. I know you're out there. Where are you? I don't know if you have updates on timelines. I'm going to keep talking while you're walking. Thanks, Gail.
Yeah, we have a webinar tomorrow about the allocation process for title, and we're supposed to get our allocations on April 11th. So they have not forecast anything to us about whether we'll be about the same, an increase or decrease, which historically they've been able to do. So it's coming out soon, but we don't have it yet.
All right. Thank you. So we keep up.
There are 6 school-wide programs at elementary and 1 targeted assistance, which is licensed at the school.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you. Board Member Victor.
Yes. I first had a comment, which is I do agree with the feedback we got from the public that we should have presented to them the revised budget prior to the public comment period tonight. was very hard for the community to be informed about the changes. And so I just want to acknowledge that feedback we got and make sure that the members of the community know that there's an opportunity again to comment on our budget at our next meeting a week from today, when we will then, after the end of our process, vote on the budget. So I apologize to the community. I do think that it was our obligation to provide them the information prior to the public comment period. I'm interested in understanding more about the Portland Adult Ed contracted pay, and I don't have clarity in terms of how grants contribute versus the district, and I'm wondering if we can cost out what the additional cost to the district would be if we increase the contracted rate to meet the average in Cumberland County. So that seems like a minimum bar. And then also I'm wondering if we can cost out if we increase prep and contact time from 2 to 3 hours per class, what the cost of that would be. One change to the budget that I was really pleased by was that we're going to support coursework for teachers to get their ESOL endorsement. And just thinking about it after our meeting last night, I'm wondering if you can say more about what that process looks like, how many teachers might be able to get that endorsement, and just a little bit more background on kind of what that will look like in the next year and beyond. And is it voluntary? I assume it's voluntary, and how do we how does is it just teachers who are interested in it? How do we ensure that across our buildings that there's that there are that there's some equity across buildings? And then I have a couple of other questions, but maybe I'll stop and for a moment with just looking for more information about the how our staff would go about getting the ESOL endorsement.
I can speak to that. I guess I would say first, as we said, this is a nascent programmatic concept, so I cannot answer your specific question. We're trying to be creative with the opportunity to leverage short-term resources. This has been a goal and an intention for a long time. So I guess just in full transparency, that's answer one. Mm-hmm. And not knowing, what was happening, we weren't planning yet. Two, there have been multiple attempts over the years and multiple opportunities and kind of programmatic designs for people to pursue this. And so people like Jane Armstrong and others have talked about the history of that. And so we would be building on some of what has happened, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what other districts are doing. I think as far as the amount we budgeted, we looked at the cost per, so it's, I think, and now I'm going to get nervous putting myself out there if I don't remember the details. I thought it was 5 courses. I'm sure I'll hear if I'm wrong. But I'm remembering, I thought it was like 5 courses, 1,500-ish per course, something like that. And so we were using those real numbers, and then we were looking at the total number of pre-K teachers, the total number of teachers in specialized programs and coaches. And that's how we came with the specific amount we put into the budget. So our current intention would be to integrate this work into professional development in those areas to see if we could do something creative with universities. Julia Hazel's working very closely with the universities on a program already that we have opportunities for people to access right now if they want to. But what we're trying to do is make steps toward a direction where it's not just if you want to, but how do we actually create a more systemic solution that's also mindful of what we're requiring and asking of our educators. And so that's why we're excited to be able to try out that model and do some design work with that in the coming year. And we're trying to focus it in particular areas where there's a rationale for why it would be, good first place to start. So I don't know if that, I know it doesn't totally answer your question, but
that's very helpful. And I very much appreciate the systemic approach.
Yeah.
The thing I'm really grappling with now on this budget, again, I know it was just, it's just been so much work to respond to the additional state funding and to figure out, to essentially present to us a completely revised budget. But the thing that I'm grappling with, having participated in the finance committee meeting last night and voted to advance the budget to the full board, is the number of core service positions that we're continuing to fund with ESSERF money. And I am, Miranda scenarios with a pretty, an optimistic scenario leads us to a 16.6% tax increase next year. And that's no new investments, just the rollover budget. And I don't really know what to do with that. You look at the opportunities for structural changes to substantially reduce our budget, and there aren't that many. They're not that, in terms of viable options. And I'm pretty familiar with these options over having participated in this process the last time we did it, or been the kind of the core, one of two school board members who participated in it and in a very in-depth way. There are not that many options. Even if we decided we could go with the options, getting to figuring out a way to close the budget gap is hard to figure out. So I'm in a place where I would be more comfortable with this budget if we moved some of the core ESSER funded core positions that we're now using ESSER money to fund back to the local budget, or to the local budget, I should say. And then that is a better starting point for the budget process next year. It's still hard next year, very hard. We will still have very, painful conversations and have to really grapple with our next steps. But it does create a better floor for us, and I think is as a result, the more responsible way to proceed. So what I'm been sitting here thinking about is coming up with an amendment that moves about, $970,000 that we're using right now that we're funding right now through ESSERF, moving those core positions to the local budget. That would free up about $1 million for summer school next year, and any other, summer school, any one-time costs, because we have to spend ESSERF money by September 30th of 2024. So I'm just putting that out there for now. I know that I believe the city council has, city council's finance committee has asked for us to do a look at the ESSER funded positions and what are positions that we would say are necessary to continue. And I'm hoping that as part of that process, there would be a prioritization, and we could actually look at, if we were going to move a whole set of positions from ESSERF over to the local budget, how we would prioritize those positions. So just wanted to share that for now, because it would be a big shift. And I recognize the last thing I want to do, given the context we're in, is to be disruptive. And we've already had a very disruptive year, disruptive budget process, given the new information from the state. And so that I'm very hesitant to propose something that would be a big shift again. But I just look at FY25 and I feel that at a complete loss. And I think that this, it would be more responsible for us to go back to the 7% tax increase that we started with. And for that then to be the building block for figuring out how to proceed next year. Thank you.
I just wanted to quickly comment that on the point about prioritizing ESSER positions. So we are in the midst of planning for the Joint Finance Committee meeting on Thursday. Kind of an update on that speaks to how we would think about prioritization and things that we would expect, ideally needing to continue versus things that could we can predict could roll off. So just wanting folks to know that we will have that information Thursday night.
Thank you, Superintendent Nelly. Board Member Opperman.
Thank you, Chair. I understand Member Figdor's concern about positions being dropped off because they're on ESSER in the future. I think that the administration did a fine job of trying to bring down the tax to 6% as a consideration to the whole community without really impacting negatively many students, because my concern is always what's going on in the classroom. And your thought to putting in $900,000 or essentially $1 million back into the budget, I would suggest if you chose that as a priority, that you would choose where to cut and keep the 6% raise. Raise in taxes, because it is a raise in taxes in addition to what people are already paying. And I think I don't think it's very thoughtful to try to increase taxes this year, and not good foresight, because we will end up cutting next year a lot. And if we are putting people's thoughts that we are at this point and we are going to roll over what we are doing this FY24 into FY25, you've already pushed the price of that particular school year way up. I was thinking when you were talking about PAE that you would say, how much cost would it be to and give that 1 hour now to those individuals? But if you did that, where would you take that money from? And other places in the budget. And I would not say that I would take it from anything that fronted on students directly. So I just disagree with the idea of increasing back up to 7%. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Board Member Opperman. Any other questions or thoughts? Okay, let me just double check. Yeah, Board Member Bryden.
Thank you, Chair. As both for the community to better understand and also for us as board members to understand, especially those of us who have not done this before. I'm curious about, so all of the information that we've been looking at has been, excuse me, FY 2022 actuals, FY 2023 budgeted, and FY 2024 budgeted. I'm curious about what happens when the 2023 actuals come in. So what if there's a discrepancy there, if there's money that was budgeted for 23 that isn't used, what happens with that?
I'll speak to
that. Well, redirect me if I'm not answering your question correctly, but so next, when was it, like February? I did a budget to actuals update, right? Mm-hmm. So quarterly we report out to the finance committee and we kind of try to keep you apprised of those things. But there are certain areas that we did indicate would be over or under budget at that point in time. There's nothing's going to change, right? So we're basing the budget, and that's true every year. There's this lag time. We have to look 2 years back because by the time we do the budget, we don't have that information. But we're monitoring it now and have made some adjustments. I think workers' comp is just one area, right? So like that's something that was noted as we're going to come in most likely under budget. We've been under budget the last few years. So that's part of our baseline review, those types of things that we're noticing. And we do that, our budget staff in-house and departments are doing that in their review as well. So that's sort of how that would play in, is really within the baseline projections for some of those core across the district costs. And yeah, does that sort of answer your question?
I think it does. And just to sort of rephrase it to make sure that I'm understanding, we're not going to find anything under the couch cushions that we can sort of leverage to make this better, correct?
I mean, we've tried. You want to answer?
Well, I think part of it is if we don't fully expend our budget, right? The projected budget expenditures, part of what you're answering is tracking towards that, right? How close are we to come in? And if we don't spend what was proposed in the budget, what happens to that remaining balance? Is that part of what you're asking, Member Brett?
Right. So if you're looking for money under the couch cushion so we can reduce FY24 because we might be over budgeting now and costs have gone down, right? That's, I guess, what I answered the first time in terms of, where the money goes. If we don't spend it, it rolls to our reserves. That's if, we don't, first and foremost, we need to come in under budget enough to not spend what was budgeted in fund balance. Then if there's even more than that, it rolls to our reserves. So those projections were part of the finance committee discussion a couple of weeks ago, where I projected we weren't going to spend the debt service reserve balance that we had budgeted for FY23 because of the Hall debt service, et cetera. So that's how we're going to continue to build up our reserves as well. So that's kind of part of the equation in terms of how we decided what in terms of fund balance to budget for FY24 as well.
Okay, thank you.
And can I add one other coins under the couch comment? And pretzels and, Nerf balls. So, my couch. So we, like Miranda mentioned, departments do a review too. So I'll just use an example of the academic team. So, we scrutinize our budget annually, line by line. I've mentioned before a process of what do we continue, reduce, increase, add, eliminate. And so we manage it pretty tightly, but then certain things happen in the year. Maybe a contract comes a little under, a little over, things like that. So we are monitoring that ongoing. And about this time, Gail and I talked about this today, we're looking at, okay, given all the lines we budgeted, if things are coming under, what's the little teeny bit we have left, and how could we potentially start buying things that are allowable to buy now, to sort of potentially create some space for the future. So there is that type of activity that happens. There's a whole set of issues around what you can buy now before you can't do services before the services are rendered, things like that. But there is a process that does that as well. It doesn't end up affecting the big overall.
It's more at the micro level.
Yeah.
Versus, okay. Right. So helpful. Thank you so much for helping me better understand that.
Right. Any other questions from the board? Okay. I would just encourage folks again, to email with questions and comments, to come to our remaining meetings, so that we can hear what's important to you and potentially respond to it if possible. So I'm going to give everybody now a 10-minute break, and then we're going to come back with Alma Advisory Group to get an update on the superintendent search. So let's plan to be back here at 8:22, please. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so we're just waiting for Sylvia. Whenever you're ready, Sylvia. There she is. Okay, let's get you on screen.
How is everybody?
Hey, we're good, Sylvia. We're excited for this update. We are deep in budgeting things, but that's okay. This is going to be some good news, I think. So whenever you're ready to kind of walk through us our process,
all right,
progress,
yeah.
And then we'll adjourn the meeting and then move into executive session. No, the opposite way around. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much for making the time tonight. I know in the midst of some pretty big decisions happening with your budget, and excited to share with you where we are with another big decision that is on the horizon. So as you all know, we have been working closely with the search committee over the last few weeks since we last presented to you all to prepare for the selection process. So want to give you an update on where we are and what's coming forth in the next 4 to 6 weeks. Just to remind everybody of the board and search committee's shared goal and purpose, our goal is to recruit, screen, and select the next transformative superintendent of Portland Public Schools. And our purpose is to lead a transparent superintendent search process guided by the equitable input of the Portland community, while centering on Portland Public Schools' historically marginalized students, families, and staff, and designed to mitigate bias every step of the way. So I'll give you a quick update on the process and want to talk about the final interview round where we will invite community and other stakeholders to be a part of a finalist interview panel. So we are at the beginning of April, and we have been, since our last meeting, heavily sourcing and recruiting candidates for the position. The ALMA team has begun first round interviews of potential candidates and are moving to the next stages of the selection process, which will involve the board and search committee. So we will hopefully start the second round interviews in the coming weeks, with the ideal state of reaching the finalist interviews by the end of April, early May. And our goal is to be able to extend an offer in May and finalize the transition plan for the incoming superintendent. The selection process that the board and search committee have worked through includes 4 interview rounds. As I mentioned, we have the ALMA team typically does the first round interviews, and I'll give you an update on the applicant pool to date. Our target that we had projected for this search is typically around 25 to 40 candidates that would go through the resume review and first round interview screen. Through March to April, we are going to begin second round interviews. Our target is to narrow that first round pool to 8 to 12 candidates, and the board and search committee will interview this next round of applicants. From there, the board has planned for a semifinalist round, which will be approximately 4 to 6 candidates who will go through a deeper dive semifinalist interview round, ending with the finalist round, narrowing the pool to 3 finalists in late April, early May. So far, we've received 36 applicants for the role. 24 of those applicants advanced to the resume review screen, and 22 were invited to a first round interview. We are on target in terms of what we anticipated for second round interviews. We anticipate between, as you noted from the previous slide, about 8 to 12 candidates will be recommended for the second round interview. I think we have probably a little higher than 8, potentially 10 to 12 candidates who will move to the second round interview. At this point, we have demographics on the applicant pool based on who self-reported using our EEO survey that we include in our applicant tracking system. So we're very pleased with the diversity of candidates so far. As you see, of the candidates who reported, we have 5% Asian, 24% Black, 38% white, 19 Hispanic, and 14% unidentified. And the pool is slightly skewed toward male candidates, but pretty equally balanced. So as we were prepare for the finalist interview round, we have been working with the communications team to prepare for the interview panels. So what that will look like, the search committee has identified 7 interview panels for the finalist interview round. So we plan to have a teacher interview panel, school and district leadership interview panel, support and operational staff interview panel, an interview panel for multilingual parents and community members, an interview panel for parents and community members, a student interview panel, and of course, a final interview with the board over the course of a day and a half interview experience for the finalist candidates. Typically in an ALMA process, the parent and student interview panels are recorded and live streamed for the community to view. And at each stage, each interview panel will provide feedback that the board will use as they make their final decision. We've been working with Grace's team to launch the nomination process. The nomination process includes 2 parts. 1, people can nominate themselves or someone else in the community to be a part of any one of these interview panels, obviously not the board interview panel, but any one of these interview panels. And then the community at large can also submit questions that each interview panel will consider as they make their final interview guide. So that process will be open through mid-April. And from there, we will we'll work with the board and search committee to select the interview panels. Those interview panels will go through a half-hour training with the ALMA team. The first part will be on our anti-bias training, and the second part will be the interview question and preparation for the interviews. So we're really excited for this part to launch, and we definitely want to make sure that the nomination materials are spread far and wide so that we have great representation across each of the interview panels. As I mentioned, in the training that we do with each interview panel, we'll really be helping the team focus on an evidence and competency-based process. We want to go back to the job profile we developed.
Sylvia, you're breaking up just a little bit. Can you say that last sentence again?
What I was saying is with each interview panel, part of the training is obviously the first part is the anti-bias training. And then the second part is really walking them through an evidence-based and competency-based screening process. So helping them craft questions that will elicit the evidence and the examples from our candidates that always point back to those key competencies that we identified in the job description. So in that evidence-based interview process, we want the interviewers to use the competencies for the job to develop their questions. As they're developing those questions and preparing to do the interviews, we want the applicant to then be able to demonstrate their opportunity to demonstrate their ability to meet the competency, and then the interviewers will be trained in collecting the evidence to verify or vet the candidates against a rubric. What we hope to do is, as we mentioned in our shared purpose, is really create a process that tries to mitigate bias and leaves out as much subjectivity and personal judgment as possible. And so we're excited to work with the community in this next phase. Let's see. And that's the quick update on where we are. We'll be meeting with the search committee this Thursday to finalize this next phase of the interview process and to complete the anti-bias training. And we hope to come back to you in a few weeks as we prepare for the subsequent rounds of the interview process. With that, I'll open it up for any questions from the board at this time.
Thank you, Sylvia. Board, what questions do you have? Are there any questions? Yes, Board Member Victor.
I have two questions, and hello, Sylvia. So good to see you tonight. My first is the expected timeline for both the second round interviews and then the finalist interviews. And I know that we might have a step between those, but just your expectation at this point as to the timelines. And then my second question, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but what is our plan to get the information out to the community about the opportunity to participate in the finalist interviews?
So in terms of the timeline, we are anticipating the second round interviews to occur between should be sometime next week. We'll be scheduling the next round of interviews. In that process, the board and search committee will be divided up into 3 interview teams, and each interview team will likely see about 3 to 4 candidates per team. So as I forecasted, about 10 to 12 candidates will move to the next round. The 3 teams will interview a third if scheduling works out between the interviewers' availability and the candidates' availability. From there, the feedback from that interview will be used to narrow the pool, and that could go one of 2 ways. We have built in time for a semifinalist interview. If the board feels strongly that they want to use that semifinalist time, then we will likely move to the semifinalist round by the end of April. And at that point, that would be 4 to 6 candidates going through an interview with the board and or search committee, which would be a longer, deeper dive interview. And then from there, that round will be narrowed to the 3 finalists, and we're projecting that to be the second week of May.
Okay, thank you.
Your second question was on the nomination process.
Can I just stop you on the scheduling for one sec? As soon as possible, if we can try and lock down the timing for the interviews next week. I know I responded several weeks ago to the doodle poll. I'm just concerned that my schedule is filled up in this. In the meantime, I'm sure the same can be said for the other board members and members of the search committee. And so I'm just getting nervous not to know that timing, and worried that it might be hard to make that commitment. So as soon as possible, if you can let us know what to expect.
Yes, we'll be talking through the scheduling in executive session and again on the 6th. Your second question was on the nomination process.
Yes, just what's the plan for getting that information to the community?
Let me see. So the nomination survey is created and open. Let me see. When we last worked with Grace and her team. Yep.
Yeah, beautiful. So it went out to the wider community over the weekend and went out again today in the Tuesday bulletin. There are links to both the nomination form and the form to submit questions for the interview process. It's also been on social media, and you can find it on the website as well. So our intention is to continue to promote those posts.
I just want to flag that I have read the Tuesday bulletin and I read the community and staff update, and I did not see it there. Perhaps
it was in the letter at the top.
Okay. Sorry if I missed it, but I'm wondering.
Yeah. No, I think we can always increase visibility, but it was definitely in the letter from me at the top of the bulletin. All right. Any other questions? Or Sylvia, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, that's where we are right now. The most important thing at this point is really to cast a wide net for participation in the interview panels. We want to leave that open for about 2 weeks to give folks a chance to nominate themselves or others through spring break to participate in an interview panel. The question submission will be open probably an additional week. That one is one that we will not need until we get closer to the final interview dates. So that one, it will remain open.
Awesome. And Sylvia, we did have one more question from Vice Chair Bondo. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you for the presentation. I just have something about I don't know if I missed the round. I think it's the second round, the interview process with the multilingual community and the community members. So I just wonder what kind of process, what kind of interview format process then are we going to have those interviews? It's going to be just like a focus group. It's going to be a workshop. It's going to be Q&A questions. So just look at the large picture of the format of the interview process with those specific communities.
Yeah. So each interview panel will have pretty much 45 minutes to an hour with each candidate. We will help each interview panel develop their list of questions for the candidates, including the multilingual parent group. We'll work closely with Grace and her team to make sure that we have interpretation for the families. And we will have interpretation for the candidates to communicate back to the families with their responses. So we'll work with them to develop their questions. We'll facilitate that process. They will then come up with their questions, and then we'll assign roles in that process. And it will be, it's generally amazing from all groups. They're self-directed and they know what they're going to do after the 2.5 hours of training. For the multilingual families, we'll just add the extra step of having interpretation, both for the candidates as well as for the families.
All right. Thank you so much.
And I would also just add that Betsy has been really continuing to be in contact with the families that came to the initial stages to really continue to give them updates about the process, and are hoping to engage them in the final panel as well. Yeah.
And I was able to find the nomination on the website. So if you go on the superintendent search page, you will see there are 3 ways that we've outlined for participation. One is to nominate yourself or someone else to be on an interview panel. The second is to submit questions to be used by the interview panelists. And then the third is to watch the actual interviews and be prepared to submit feedback. So anyone in the community can watch the live streamed student and parent interviews and submit their feedback to the board for consideration.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, well, if you leave the room and think of them, let us know and we'll get you the answers. So now we are going to move to move into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA Section 405-6A to talk about a personnel matter, which is the planning for the superintendent interviews. So is there a motion? Thank you, Board Member Bryden. Is there a second? Thank you, Board Member Russell Better. And then when we come out of executive session, we'll go right into adjournment. Thank you.
Okay.
We have to adjourn.
We have to adjourn.
Do we have to go to our seats?
No, we can just
Okay.
stand in the middle area. Hold on, let me make sure we have enough. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Move to adjourn. Thank you, Board Member Victor. Seconded, Board Member Biden. Sorry, on all those in favor. Beautiful. We are adjourned at. Anyone have the time? 10:23.